Postcards from Nebraska on RFD-TV, a program about rural life. This week, it was once a necessity of every corn farmer in the country, but machines have replaced the fine art of hand-picking corn, turning this old-time essential into a quaint competition. He's an unlikely poet of the plains, a high-flying tree trimmer with a way with words, and a chainsaw. Plus, it's the great American hand tool used to grip, bend, and secure most anything. It's the locking pliers, invented and manufactured in a tiny Nebraska town. And finally, he was just an ordinary mason until he decided to turn his trade into an art. And the scale of his creations will hit you like a brick wall. It's all this week on Postcards from Nebraska.
There was a time when that was autumn's most common sound all across America. The sound of ripe ears of corn slamming into the bangboard of a harvest wagon. Millions of ears of corn picked by hundreds of thousands of hands wearing pegs and hooks. But now huge corn-picking machines lurch across America's fields night and day to bring in the harvest. Taking in minutes what used to take hand workers days, even weeks to pick by hand. In the good old days, a farmer hoped to finish picking his corn crop by Thanksgiving, but in reality, it was often as late as February or March. Those machines have turned the old, tedious, laborious job of corn picking into a weekend recreational activity.
We need all the senior citizens pickers to please report to the east end of the way area.
Like this one, at Gothenburg, Nebraska's annual Harvest Festival. A competition to see whose mind and muscle best remembers and best echoes this ballet from the past. It's not just a matter of pulling an ear off and throwing it. There's a rhythm that comes from long practice.
Hey, step up.
And an accuracy. Ask Harold Korth, who claims 11 national corn-picking championships.
Yeah, there's an act to it. Oh, yeah.
Do you learn anything still today from the other guys who are...
No, really not. Really not. Sorry to say, I had a lot of them copy my act. Not to brag, but no. Yeah, they did. Well, we're not picking fast here.
A dropped ear, a missed ear, an ear short or long of the wagon costs valuable points and a possible championship. How come you win and the other guys don't?
Well, one thing is, don't throw your arm out. You probably noticed I keep my elbow by my side. You throw your arm way out, you'll lose 2, 3, 4 ears a minute by all that. Keep it out here and you just keep feeding them in there.
Harold Korth's son, Rick, has been a Gothenburg champion more than once. Did you learn from your dad?
Yes, I did. I had a pretty good mentor there. He knows a lot of the tricks of the trade, they say.
When you were driving here, you and your dad were talking about corn picking. What were you talking about?
Well, he talked about in the old days when they'd start, it'd be hot, probably be early October, end of September, and then before they get done, it'd be cold, it'd be snowing.
Watch these images closely. Folks like these are working hard to keep the craft of hand picking alive.
Back in 38 and 41, yeah, I picked corn with my dad.
Folks like Richard Kleckner. Give me a little bit of technique. How do you pick a
Well,
ear
you
of corn?
just grab the ear, and you come down with your hook like that, and then you stay there. And the secret of it is not to go throwing it out. You got to keep there working. You just
So
flip
it's really
the ear.
the wrist.
Yeah, you're pulling the shucks back with this hand, see, and then you flip it out with this, see. You just go like that, and then you flip like that.
But there are signs that may not last forever. There are signs. When I was making arrangements to be here for this contest, I told the folks in charge I'd probably want to see the corn-picking champions at work, as well as the old-timers recalling their days in the fields. The response hit me hard. A lot of the champions are the old-timers. So while the process of picking corn by hand, the sound of the hard ears hitting the bangboard may live on for a while, the real champions, the best of the pickers, may not be here for long.
Like the 100-meter dash or the high jump, every year brings stronger, faster competition. But in corn picking contests, some of the trophies still go to the same old guys who've been out here picking for a generation or two. For some reason, as I approach my own 60th birthday, I find that bit of information comforting.
I want to go up there where the deadwood was, and I can throw a rope in here and climb up this section.
Some of these ash trees down here I know are kind of punky too. You want to be careful because they tend to rot in the middle.
Yeah.
Bob McEwen is an old friend of mine. I used to work with him now and then as his grunt, the ground man who stacks brush, sends up tools, holds lines, does whatever Bob might need while he's up in the arboreal trapeze where he seems so at home.
How long you been doing this?
Oh, I'd have to check the records, but I started up in probably around 1963. Boy, the first time I ever got up in a tree, it was miserable. It was 200 degrees out, and I made a cut, and the carpenter ants came boiling out all over. There were aphids in it, and I got all tangled up in my ropes, and the foreman was yelling and screaming, and I felt like a moron. But one cut led to the next, and here I am. Now I want to keep this rope strung out. I don't want it to get binded or...
Bob has steel in his veins. He's a weightlifting champion, as a matter of fact. He's so imposing, so rough-looking, he can even be a little scary to those who are weak of heart. So the grace he demonstrates while working in his trees, almost a ballet, is all the more surprising.
I first met Bob McEwen as a colleague when he was a teacher and graduate student in the English department at the University of Nebraska, where I also taught, and Bob is a top-notch teacher. But even more surprising than his skill with rope, climbing, hooks, and chainsaw, even more remarkable than his alter ego as teacher and scholar is his remarkable grace with words.
For all my fallen crews, whose scattered parts will never play again, or fall with less tenacity, more grace, I dedicate these lines.
Even more than a tree surgeon, or weightlifter, or teacher, Bob McEwen is a poet.
Tree trimmer's paradise. There wasn't any time today to think. Amid the wind-wrought havoc in the tree, I worked from 8 a.m. up to the brink of night. No time, I say, to hold my knees beneath me steady in that heaving top, or catch within my railing lungs a song that didn't rattle to be gone. So that it doesn't matter what your mind comes up with on a windy day. You sing whatever songs are possible, and know on days like this, the wind will always blow. You don't do much composing when you're working, but after, if you leave yourself open to it and sit down, it'll come. Now, it may not be a tree trimming poem, but I've always found that I do good work on paper after I've done good work in a tree.
Bob McEwen's Heartwood and other poems speaks of the world of the tree trimmer, a story of love, human passion, and trees.
In the morning when you go to work, you might remember that your father died because he stayed too long one windy day, bestride a limb that, now you think it, waited long for him. Resetting lines, he should have kept himself tied in above. Instead, he fixed his rope around a limb on which he stood. Around the limb he'd trampled, gouged, and cut so drastically it never would green back. So who was then the man to beat? The man who left his fingernails still clinging to the limb above?
Oscar Wilde brought to America and the Plains frontier the image of the poet as, well, as twit.
Okay,
an unfortunate stereotype that persists. But to my mind, you have to be a real man to be a poet these days. These days, nothing takes more strength and courage than bearing one's soul in the profoundly personal mechanisms of poetry.
The winter blast. Well, I think artists have to be courageous people, and the men and women who create art have to go out on a limb, no pun intended, you know, and really put their lives on the line if they're going to do good work.
If anyone is strong enough, in body and soul, to set the old stereotype of the poet as sissy aside, it's Bob McEwen, tree trimmer, weightlifter, teacher, poet.
The wind is full tonight in a large dead ash tree that swags and swings its broken hands and dumps its trash upon the ground. Half heard in the upper forks, a silver owl stands almost impregnable, hooting the same demanding question over and again into the night, out of a tree gone lame from too much careless clashing in the wind.
It's not surprising, I suppose, that my farm shop in Dannebrog, where I work on old tractors, is dominated by fairly common tools, old standards like wrenches and hammers, a few less common devices like valve spring compressors and pullers. All mechanics are familiar with tools like that. What may be surprising to a lot of people, however, even mechanics, is the increasing prevalence of this peculiar mutant form of the ordinary pliers, the locking Vise-Grip pliers.
Vise-Grips don't just grip, they clamp down. In my shop, I have long-nose Vise-Grips, round jaw, square jaw. There are 40 varieties in all. I even carry some in my pickup truck for whatever emergencies come along on the road or around the farm.
They're good, solid American-made tools, but better than that, they're good, solid Nebraska-made tools. Manufactured right here in this little town of de-Witt, invented right here by a Danish immigrant blacksmith back when Kelvin Coolidge was president.
This building right here was his original blacksmith shop. That's the exterior of it. This is an interior shot of the early factory dating from, I would guess probably 1925 or 6. That's Grandpa Peterson there. Grandpa came here in 1901 from Denmark with empty pockets but a head full of ideas.
Bill Peterson started the company. Grandson Ellen Peterson runs the business today.
Each of these pieces is put together with a rivet. This was one of the first jobs I had in this factory, was putting a little roll pin in this hole here to attach the lever to the easy release trigger. I think I made about 80 cents an hour.
Ellen Peterson remembers the day his grandfather acknowledged his manhood.
He decided one day when he figured out I'd grown up, when I was 16 years old, he took me over here to the local beer joint and he sat me down on a hot summer afternoon, and he said to the bartender, "We want 2 cold beers and 2 good cigars."
You had made the grade.
I made the grade. I passed his test.
This single factory in this little town is responsible for the entire output of millions of Vise-Grip pliers per year that reach every end of the earth.
No matter how carefully all these parts are made, you need a guy who knows what he's doing to pound around on it with a hammer, and he can feel when he locks it under if it's just exactly right.
Now these are good tools, but they have one fault. They aren't always used the way the manufacturer may have intended, even on the assembly line.
All over this factory, you'll see Vise-Grip pliers that's been temporarily attached to some stationary object so that it can be used for some other purpose.
Temporarily 20 years ago.
Probably. It looks about 20 years old.
It doesn't bother you then that I used them to repair my toilet and they're still in there 20 years later?
I love it. We don't have any...
In my own home in Dannebrog, I put down a pair of long noses on the kitchen table, and the next time I need them, they're gone. I find them somewhere else. On the yard gate, on the washing machine, on the microwave, on the hot tub. I've complained about this problem to the Vise-Grip people. They told me they have problems of their own.
We don't have any hard statistical evidence, but we have anecdotal evidence that probably most of the Vise-Grip tools in use at this second around the world are in use as some kind of a temporary handle or a clamp or a holding device, and not in fact being used as a pliers or a wrench or a wire cutter.
So they're really more coat hangers than tools.
Well, they can be both.
I can't help but wonder if in 1,000 towns scattered across the plains, there aren't other blacksmiths like Bill Peterson, or mechanics or farmers working on ingenious tools and devices that'll make our lives a little easier. Iron Horse Legacy is the work of Jay Cheddar. Jay cuts and carves, molds and shapes pretty much like any other sculptor. But the medium of his work is not the stuff of conventional sculpture elsewhere in more hospitable environments.
The medium of his work is clay and brick.
It's my very first piece that I was commissioned to do by the city of Lincoln. It details the first train to ever enter Lincoln in 1870, and in that time the buffalo disappeared right along with the coming of the railroad, so it was a real quick time in which you would see these two elements combined on the prairie.
Was it intimidating to take on a job this enormous as one of your first pieces?
Yeah, the size and that added complication of bringing color into it was exhilarating and exhausting at the same time.
I suppose I shouldn't say just a bricklayer, but when you were just a bricklayer, did you ever dream about doing this kind of thing?
No, I didn't. I had never seen anything like this until I saw...
You see, Jay Cheddar was a bricklayer who became a plains sculptor.
Having been a bricklayer for a long time and an artist, I realized I could combine my two disciplines into something that looked like I would enjoy doing very much.
I think that not very many people understand the variety of bricks, you know, the sizes and shapes, the colors are amazing.
Yeah, there's an infinite variety of color combinations that one could use. It's just wide open. There's reds, browns, purples, gold, you know, everything. There's so many combinations. Yeah, it
really is like an artist's palette, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a palette of colors that...
This has kind of a sheen to it.
Here on the plains, Jay Cheddar had no straight-grained hardwoods other carvers have in their homelands. There's no translucent alabaster or durable marble. There are no mother lodes here to provide precious, malleable metals for smelters and molds. But there is clay. Underlying the topsoils of eastern Nebraska are beds of fine-grained, rich clays, suitable for firing as brick.
It's oversized wet clay brick that I start the process with.
Do you have any idea, Jay, about the history of the clay, how long it's been lying there in the ground?
This clay is very old. I think it's a good couple million years old where they're mining it from, and it is some real sacred stuff.
Does brick have the kind of permanence as good marble?
Yes. A mural should be able to stand 1,000 years or more if it's constructed properly and not too much water damage is leaking into it. Trying to be opportunistic.
A clear advantage to brick sculpture is that Jay's art is not simply an adjunct to buildings and architecture. Jay's work is an integral part of the very walls it graces.
We do a lot of detail, and it gets...
Its texture, color, and basis is the very stuff of the walls around it.
At this point, this stuff isn't really brick. It's just wet clay, isn't it?
That's correct.
You're working with some pretty humble stuff here. This is just good old Nebraska dirt.
Yes. Yeah, it's a real special dirt. Once it's fired, these brick are fired at around 2,300 degrees in there, and they're pretty hard.
So when you're done, they dismantle this whole thing and then fire it just as they would fire brick.
Basically, yes, just with a little more care in the handling part of it.
I'm particularly drawn to Jay's historical work, such as his enormous wall sculpture showing the history of Western photography at the St. Louis Arch, depicted here in a documentary from Nebraska Educational Television.
To determine the color of brick that are on each... They wanted me to tie it into the beginning of the historical roots of photography with the people that went out along on the geological survey teams that were the first ones to record images of Yosemite and the Grand Canyon and so forth.
That's kind of a nice cycle to go from the geological survey back to the very stuff of geology itself.
Yes, yeah.
When you were just a plain old bricklayer, when you were handling those brick, did you ever think about them in terms of art?
Yeah, I saw it early on. I kind of wanted to play a little more creatively than I was being allowed to.
There aren't a lot of people who have that kind of singular focus that you have in your life. Brick. Your life is defined in terms of a brick.
It sure is, sure is.
Somehow, I find brick comforting. I'm not sure that material that's foreign to the plains, wood, stone, metal, can ever really be at home here, especially in art. I like the notion that our regional arts, the stuff that feeds our spirits, springs directly from the soil beneath our feet, from the very dirt that feeds our bodies. That's what art should be.